Greetings, Kerbonauts. This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 36 of Project Odyssey. At the end of the last episode, we had a few things going on. The one you saw a moment ago is how we left it. We also had this flight right here that had started, but I didn't show the docking of this new module to the space station yet. There is a minimum of 20 crew capacity per one actual Kerbal when we have anyone living for a long duration on anything in my game, so this new module is a whole lot of extra living space. At the moon we had a new module for our ground base. This one contains a whole lot of life support and a little bit of living space as well. We flew over our ground base on the way to make our moon capture there, but ultimately, due to some problems with the liftoff originally, we didn't have enough fuel to land. So we'll be trying to take care of that, perhaps as part of this episode. Also, the unstable local wormhole that has Hadfield trapped right now is going to open up, so while we're here, we'll try to rescue him as well. Speaking of Hadfield, we have the satellite that had gone to Jool. You can see Jool right there passing by us right now as the Save Hadfield Jool Scoop is making its return right here back to Kerbin. That satellite is probably going to make it back this episode. You can see right there, there's a maneuver set up. This maneuver is designed to adjust the trajectory just a tiny bit to make sure that we can intercept Kerbin right about here. It looks like we're about a year away from that because here's Kerbin here and the intercept is behind it. So that means this is probably going to go all the way around like this, come back again, and then intercept there. Now there's not enough fuel on that in order to really capture, so we'll have to send something up that as it passes by Kerbin, we're going to capture it. There's also the matter of small atmospheric disturbances at Kerbin. They are mini anomalies created by some sort of strange gravitational field that has intensified over by Eve, and this satellite is investigating that. And if we can make it that far, we'd like to get back to this moon base where Svetlana is going to land and hook everything up so that we can start generating power by drilling kethite and converting it into electricity. Alright, so let's get to it, shall we? Well, we're having a little bit of trouble if we skip ahead in the launch that was taking Svetlana up there. Something started to go wrong with our boosters. They were overheating. They'd been running a little bit low on fuel anyway, so I decided to give them a decouple, but that didn't help and things started to explode. I expected to burn that core for a bit longer than we just did there, and it has exploded as well. So you might think that this is time to abort this mission, but this is a real mission. So I have to play it out and see if Svetlana and Neil can be rescued. So at this point, I'm just going to decouple our protective shell. We're high enough up now that if I need to come back down again, we don't really need to abort by using that launch escape system. We'll drop the lower fairing. When the fuel tank died, it didn't take the fairing with it, so we'll decouple that and let that slip away. And then it's a matter of seeing if we can get this ship to orient itself correctly. Maybe if we can boost into a low orbit, it'll be still a somewhat salvageable mission. We'll leave that as a cliffhanger for the moment, because at the same time we had another mission going. This gigantic life support module was heading up to the station. We had created an intercept at that second point there on the orbit far ahead, and we were coming in for our rendezvous. Essentially still suborbital at this point. We need to start our rendezvous here with the burn that will match up our orbits, taking advantage of MechJeb just a little bit there with the smart ASS window, just so I don't have to do the tedious pointing at the target thing by hand. But in the middle of this burn, I'm about to get an interesting little surprise. Odyssey Station, Jebediah, Valentina, and Kessler Kerman have all died of dehydration. Oh, come on. They have not. I know that that station is full of water. We're going to tab over there in just a second and see if there is a bunch of water on the station. And if there is, I'm going to have a little bit of saved game hackery in my future. Because if there really is water there, I'm not going to allow the game to tell me that they are dead. And there it is right there. Food, water, oxygen, all doing great. In fact, On 2 of them, we're near 50% of our total capacity. So I'll go on with the mission as if nothing had happened. We need to release the space tug that we have up here at the station because it has to go over and bring over that module. The module has no propulsion of its own. We'll dock on the space tug after we have decoupled the module from that boost stage, then drag it over here and hook it up. It's actually in 2 parts. So after we put the whole thing in place, we'll decouple a second segment of it and then shift that into its final position. But for now, we just need to get over there with the space tug. This has been a long series and a few weeks off, so let's also recap the state of the adventure. An anomaly in our original dimension began collapsing our sun, so we activated a strange alien technology called the Omega-13 in the hope that it would stabilize things. But whether it worked or not, we don't know, since we were shunted into another dimension through a wormhole or an anomaly ourselves. We tried to find a way back home, but it happened again, this time sending us to a 3rd dimension, or maybe even forward or backward in time, since the anomalies can cause unpredictable temporal changes too. In some of the other dimensions, there are Kerbals who are like us, but who have lived totally different lives, and the dimensions closest to ours have been affected by anomalies too, affected by these temporal ripples like waves on a pond. Some of the damage to nearby dimensions has been catastrophic. Svetlana, the alternate reality sister of our own Valentina, accidentally came through a wormhole into our latest dimension. Svetlana's home dimension has been severely wrecked by these anomalies, but she's now helping us to get back home against the orders of her superiors. In fact, they have, unknown to us, captured Bill Kerman because in the latest dimensional shift, he was left behind. Right now, the alternate dimension is working to establish a large enough and stable enough connection to our dimension to follow through to where we are. They are trying to steal our technology, to merge with their own, to restabilize their own sun before the same thing happens to them that already happened to us. Captain Kamalak, the captain of the alternate reality ship called Raptor 1, has beamed down to the surface in the dimension where we were a few weeks ago, and he has discovered bits of technology that will allow his people to finish the necessary changes.
Alright, are we ready to do this thing?
Yes, sir. All stations reporting green.
Okay, open the channel to Raptor 1. This is Eagle Nest to Raptor 1. Are you ready on your side? We are. The device is fully functional. Bill has been quite helpful. Alright, let's do this.
Meanwhile, while all that is going on, let's check in again and see how Svetlana and Neil are doing in their attempt to get into orbit. Because we were so high, I decided that I might be able to use what we have left here to get ourselves into orbit. At only 50 kilometers, we still need to boost a bit higher. But we don't really have a lot of atmosphere dragging us down right now, so I fire up the engines whenever we're going prograde and give it a try. After a little bit of maneuvering with the RCS system, it seems that we are able to maintain a prograde vector. They get themselves all straightened out, and now it's just a matter of finding out whether we had the delta V necessary to complete this orbit. Going higher and higher, up through the 50s, up to 60 kilometers. And seeing that the stage delta V remaining is still around 1,000 or 1,100 meters per second, I'm guessing that's going to be enough. The original plan was that if we were going to have enough delta V on that original booster that has exploded beneath us, then we should have had enough to go all the way to the moon. But just like the mission we had before that got to the moon but didn't have enough to land, now this one is probably going to get into orbit but isn't going to have enough to get to the moon. So now we have a couple refuelings that we're going to have to do, assuming this one even works out. That's still in question because if you look up at the time to apoapsis and at how fast we're traveling, the acceleration that we have, you're going to see that we're catching up on our apoapsis. So at this point, it's pretty clear that the engine on this hasn't been strong enough so far to really give us that boost that we're going to need. But on the other hand, we are pretty high up there. By adjusting the nose of the craft, pitching it up a little bit, perhaps that will keep me from dropping down into the other side of the apoapsis. So I'm going to try to keep it right around 1 second. I'm going to pitch up if we have problems, let it pitch back down again if we start getting a little bit of time, a few seconds, and if it all works out, then maybe we will get up there. Once again, we'll check in with that later because I want to go take a look at that space station module that we were trying to dock. We had the space tug heading over to the module and getting ready to drag it back to the station to dock it up. There are two types of docking ports on the space tug. We have one that I call a common berthing docking node, and the other one is more like a ship docking node. With one on each side, I can use whichever side happens to be required in order to grab onto something, so the thing that I'm going to grab onto can obviously have either one of those on its side. In this case, it's the ship docking node, so we go in that side first and grab on. We don't need the orbital injection stage that got us up here anymore, so we'll tab over to that and get that out of the way just to make sure we don't collide with it and send it on its retrograde vector to go back and be destroyed. After that, we'll tab back to the space tug module and flip it around so that we can aim it at the docking port. We have a very large space station sized docking port on the far end of the module that needs to go in first. Well, that one's going well, but how about this one? Oh man, we are running lower and lower on Delta V and we still haven't reached a proper altitude. It looks like we're about to run dry.
So what do you make of that second transmission from the other side that we just saw?
It sounds to me like they took Bill, tortured him for information about our tech, and somehow used it to perfect a way to move between dimensions.
We need to see what Svetlana knows and see if she'll help us get Bill back.
Judging by the readings we're getting from the satellite at Eve, I'd say they are using gravity wells to open wormholes.
Back around Kerbin, we're coming into position with those two stacked modules. They're all lined up in our Navyfish docking alignment indicator in the bottom right of the screen, so I know I just have to ease my way in now. I had pre-filled up the space tug by draining some of the hydrazine down into the tug to make sure that I'd have enough for this. The modules themselves don't really have much, although there are some outer tanks that are welded to one of the module pieces, and I'm assuming that they're filled with hydrazine. Well, not just assuming, they are literally filled with hydrazine, but I'm pretending that that's where it's coming from. Some from there, and some from different docking ports that have small containers of hydrazine on the outside of them as well. I'm lining these docking ports up in such a way that the RCS on one is opposite the direction of the RCS on the other. Since there were only 2 RCS ports on each of those docking ports, but now with the way that they're aligned, there are 4 of them going in the 4 directions. And after that, we have to do a little bit of fuel transfer. I want to make sure that it's all in this side that we're detaching to flip around and bring the module down to attach from underneath. Before we finish up that docking, I've talked a couple times about how this thing is going to split apart. Let's take a look at it in the VAB and see what I'm talking about. First, we'll scroll down here to the bottom, take a look at this. So we have our fairly usual lower stage. I get that over here out of my sub-assemblies, but I also attached to it some of these Atlas SRB sub-assemblies and then scaled them up a little bit. I did that, of course, so I could get the little extra thrust-to-weight ratio that I was going to need right here, but we dumped them off fairly early. We lose 3 of them right here, and then another 3 in this stage right here, just to make sure they don't collide with each other on their way. However, you saw that we had a little problem with some kind of overheating or something like that. I don't think it's necessarily something wrong with this lifter. It was probably just that particular flight. I'll bet if I did this again, we wouldn't have the issue. So we have our avionics ring right there under the decoupler, which brings us up to this stage. I believe you've seen this one before. It has the engine sitting on top of the fuel tank here, where I used some structural pieces to attach my RCS, and then on the sides of those I have the monopropellant to operate those, and those are just for my pitch and yaw control. The antenna is stuck right there. That one pops out after we get into flight using the action groups that I have set up. We have right here action group 1 that activates my communications, which is the first thing I usually want to do. The way I do all my action groups is number 1 is the first thing I want to do, number 2 is the second thing I want to do, and so on. Number 2 is activating the RCS, because when I first turn the RCS on, I don't want the RCS up in here functioning, I just want these jets down here functioning. So the ones that are up in the fairing are turned off. After the fairing is released, then I hit action group 2, which turns those on. There aren't any more action groups on this launch, so we'll just start moving our way up further into the parts, taking off the fuel tank and the second ring there and the fairing. That leaves us with our payload. This is a good example of how things have changed over time, actually. You'll note that now built into these parts are these little golden railings. I did that a couple episodes back. The golden railings are welded into the parts, and on the day that I did weld those into the parts, any parts that were already out in the world up on the station automatically acquired those as if they had been there when they were launched. So I just pretended that my guys went outside on an EVA and installed them. Working our way up from here, you can see we have our pretty serious RCS station jets right there. Lots of power in those because, of course, you're trying to move very large pieces. Docking ports all around this. We have the one at the bottom and the ones on the sides here and here. Those tanks right there are not parts I can take away. Those were these, but I scaled them down and then I welded them into the part. So this is actually one part right here. Lots of living space because that's what the objective is for this whole thing. Before I take more of this away, I'm going to show you where the joint is. See right here, this is a big docking port attached to a little one. Once I decouple them, they will never be able to go back together again, but I'm not going to need that. Instead, what's supposed to happen is I decouple this right here, and then that docking port that was on the side I took off just a moment ago, this will swing around and dock back up again on that one, or maybe it was this one over here actually, right there. The space tug is going to do all of that maneuvering, but for now this is still attached right here for liftoff to keep it inside the fairing. This lower segment is pretty much all station interior space so that they have a lot of place to live, lots of elbow room in there. Then moving our way up, we have this nice observatory here with a few communication dishes all around the outside of it in case I need to point something from the station somewhere else in the universe. Well, not really universe. These are technically Kerbin area, but it could be used to communicate with TDRS satellites or as relays to longer range satellites. So moving our way back through these again, I'll just show you real quick. Just a few stacked modules all through here. 1, 2, 3. There's the docking port, little docking port, connector piece, another living space, observation module, another connector, a docking port that had RCS on it, and that's it. There weren't many lights on it, but the reason for that was there were many lights all around it anyway. Lots of those parts have lights built in, and look at this one. This one is practically nothing but lights. So there you go, that's the station module that we're currently putting on. Let's go back and take a look at the last part of it. And back to Svetlana. When we last checked in with her, they were almost out of regular fuel, and there it goes. We are now completely drained of regular fuel, but there is a lot of RCS hydrazine on here, so we're going to see if we can do any sort of orbit by just trying to use that. It will be a long time before we fall back down again from gravitational drag, since we had been at 56 kilometers. Or what am I saying? Not gravitational drag, atmospheric drag. Anyway, with the hydrazine we had on board, we were able to use the little motors on the bottom of the engine, right around the engine, that help normally with just stabilizing it. We were able to use those to push ourselves up above the atmosphere. Now we just need to keep going until we get to our apoapsis and see if there's enough hydrazine left in order to finish the orbit by bringing the periapsis up above the atmosphere as well. I'm feeling fairly confident about this, pretty optimistic. There's over 200 liters of fuel left and only 10 kilometers that we need to raise the far side. And here we go, the engines are on. And there we go, just a little while later, we have run it out from the lower stage. There's still quite a bit left in the upper stage, 500 liters in that one, and only barely off from a 70-kilometer circular orbit. By continuing around the apoapsis one more time and then just going a little bit more, we finally get it up there. We are now in a very stable orbit. Stable, yes, but unfortunately completely devoid of fuel. So after waiting for mission control to come around under the orbit where we are, we're going to launch a resupply craft. This is my ATV style resupply, capable of carrying so much fuel it could deliver it to the moon if it needed to, which means we should be able to deliver enough to the ship that we're going to send to the moon in order to get there, as well as to refuel the craft that we have stranded there. Take care of 2 birds with 1 stone. This one is a tried and tested lifter, which I suppose is a really good thing to have in something that you're considering to be your sort of rescue or resupply craft. You want something consistent and reliable. If your rescue craft, your resupply craft, if those aren't reliable, well, you're gonna be in a lot of trouble. You'll be sending rescues for your rescues for your rescues. The other thing you want is a reliable way of getting there, a trajectory. And my method is to simply wait for the craft to come from behind me, be coming over the horizon behind me, and then just lift off and keep going in a normal gravity turn until I can get looking at the horizon and just go that direction until I can get a close approach. This will naturally happen all by itself, pretty much on any launch where the target craft is coming over the horizon behind you. And there's our payload, ready for rendezvous, ready for resupply. We just need to wait for it to get closer to the target. That'll give me a little time to go and check on the return vessel coming from Jool. Hadfield's medicine needs to get here. And episode after episode, it seems like I have so many things to do that I never really get to this. So I'm going to fast forward for a bit, allowing the craft to get closer. Once it gets to that maneuver node that you can see there on my orbit, I'm going to make an adjustment that should improve the trajectory for its capture back here at Kerbin. See, the problem I'm going to have is that the speed it's going right now is really, really fast. So when it comes back through Kerbin's SOI, I'm going to have to spend a lot of delta V to recapture that. But if we force its trajectory back across the front of Kerbin, then that may help reduce the amount of delta V I need, pretty much the exact opposite of a gravity slingshot maneuver. This is going to be a way to pull some of the velocity off by using the gravity of Kerbin. Then once it actually gets here, as it's passing through the SOI, I'm going to have to capture it like we mentioned. It only has a docking node on it. It doesn't really have any fuel to slow itself down. So the ship we're launching here is going to go out, and as it's passing through the SOI, we'll dock with it. We'll grab on, we'll use this vessel to slow it down. After we drop the boosters here, let me take you out to a sample that I've set up, a little cheated example that I'm going to use to show you what I'm talking about. In order to demonstrate what I'm talking about with that gravity maneuver, I have cheated to put out here in between the orbit of Kerbin and Eve, right in between. You can see I've put a spacecraft right there. Just for this cheat, I'm going to turn on the infinite fuel and infinite RCS. When I'm done with this, I'm going to revert this. So for now, this is just so I can show you what I'm talking about. What I'm going to do is start a maneuver that will bring this Hydra that I've positioned in between here down to meet the orbit of Eve. And as it crosses over Eve's SOI, I'm going to show you what happens to the orbit of the Hydra. Alright, I've got myself pointed at my retro vector here, so using the infinite fuel cheat, we're just going to fire up the engines until we can bring that other side orbit down to intercept Eve. I'll just speed up the replay here of it to 16 times normal speed of what it was when I was doing the maneuver. Alright, there we can see that we now have an intercept. The question is, what's going to happen as Eve's gravity interacts with our ship? If we zoom over here and go closer to Eve itself, we can see that we're currently passing above Eve. What I'm going to do is make another adjustment to bring this orbit so that it's passing across the front of Eve, either here or in the back on the other side. That's where I'll be able to show what's going to happen as we're really, really close to it on one side or the other. Whoops, one little problem. Previously, in order to cheat it into orbit, I had turned the hack gravity off and on. And when I made my first maneuver, it was still on. I had to turn it off just now in order to make this work correctly. So we're going to make this burn one more time. There we go, we have that going back through the SOI again. Now I want to move this down and get it closer to the planet. The orbit's a little misaligned, but this will still show what I want. Alright, there you go. You can see that we have an intercept, but the orbit itself isn't really changing much. You can see the purple orbit here is the presumed orbit after having intercepted Eve. It's not doing very much yet. I'm going to demonstrate what happens as we go closer to Eve on one side versus the other next. Looking up very close at the planet, if we were in here, you would see that this is now going to shift closer and closer to Eve right here. Then it'll pass through Eve as if it were colliding, followed by coming out the other side and going further away on this side. As that happens, watch what happens to the orbit of the purple orbit that shows where we are going to be going after passing through the SOI. Applying the tiniest bit of fuel, you can see that we're getting some pretty dramatic changes to our new orbit from barely any acceleration on our part. Let's zoom in to see what's happening close to Eve. I'm barely applying any thrust at all. You can see that it's getting a little bit closer at a time. It's so low. Look at the velocity right here. Barely any engine. Very slowly getting closer to Eve just to demonstrate what happens with minor changes in delta V. Look how that is dropping off. The orbit is getting so small right now. If we had wanted to do that using actual fuel, there's no way that I could be using 0.1 meters per second to make these huge changes. Now watch, I'm going to increase it again, tiny bit, just barely going up on the fuel, and now we're starting to come out the other side of Eve, and as that happens, Eve is adding to our velocity more and more and more, until eventually we come out the other side and we start picking up so much velocity that if we had wanted to use this to even get back to Kerbin's orbit, we would have been able to. See that down here by Eve, we're now coming out the other side, which is turning it into a gravity slingshot maneuver. Although the further we get away from Eve, the less benefit that we're going to get. So this will most likely start to get smaller again as we get further away on the far side. Let's go ahead and continue that and you'll see what I'm talking about. Once again, just a little bit of fuel. And that looks like it's about as good as it's going to get, but that slung us way out past Kerbin's orbit. Now, as it moves further and further this direction, it's going to keep getting smaller and smaller again because Eve is having less effect on that trajectory until eventually what would happen is we would lose the encounter with Eve entirely. And at that point, this orbit will match back up again, and basically we will have increased our orbit a little just through our own use of fuel, but Eve will not have contributed anything to it as we went along. See how we're getting so much smaller now? So that's what I'm talking about when I mention what's going to happen with that return craft from Jool. If it had come back and gone around the outside of Kerbin, it would have gained velocity and gone into a higher orbit. By bringing it around the front, we're pulling some velocity off. Alright, so that's it. I'm now going to remove this craft from orbit since it was cheated up here just to demonstrate this. And of course turn those cheats back off. I don't want them affecting anything else in the game. We will return to the capture vessel. This is lifting off into a retrograde orbit to the planet's rotation. Normally you would take off and head east. We're taking off heading west so that we can go backward. And the reason for that is that's the side that the Jool return craft is going to be coming by on. Since I'm not entirely sure exactly how much delta V I'm going to need total, this is a transfer stage. I've launched this one a couple times now. Up inside the fairing, we have an inverted whole upper stage that we can use with nuclear engines on it for doing transfer maneuvers. And we'll use that for one boost on the other vessel. We're going to launch that one separately, and that's going to be the majority of the Delta V, hopefully, that we're going to need in order to do this recapture. The second vessel also has up on top of it a small space tug that I'll use. Once we can get close enough to my target, the space tug will grab onto the Jool return craft, drag it over to the larger high Delta V capture stage, dock it back up again, and then that will slow things down so that we can get it back around Kerbin. As you can see, this one is fairly massive, and yeah, I might be overthinking it, overplanning it, overbuilding it, but that's what this is all about, right? This is what's fun. Don't bother planning things out so that you know that you're going to be perfectly efficient and everything's going to work. Just throw some crap out there and see what happens. Launch gigantic things with all kinds of boosters and huge stages. This is Kerbal Space Program. That's what we're here for. There's no such thing as too many boosters. There's no such thing as too much Delta V. We're out here for the 4 S's. The science, the SRBs, the snacks, and the struts. Not necessarily in that order. Probably snacks would be number 1. Maybe SRB's second. Would it be the struts second? Or maybe it's the science. I guess it all depends on who you're going to talk to, but we have to have our 4 S's and more lights. Hopefully we'll have all 5 of those in the next episode. Until then, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.